Get ready for the Ochelli effect.
February 11, 2025, allegedly, according to that thing we call a calendar. And yeah, this is the show you were looking for. How do I know it? Because you found it. The Ochelli effect. Anyway, look, it is a Tuesday, right? And Tears Day it is. And it's funny because normally I've had Larry Hancock on lately on Wednesdays, but this is a special episode anyway for more than one reason. And in case you haven't guessed yet, yes, Larry Hancock is back with me, of course, an author who takes up a lot of space on my bookshelf. I've said this before, and he doesn't just take up space there. And we're not today going to talk about the new book on Lee Harvey Oswald, not at all. In fact, we're going to talk about something that I really was unsure we were going to end up getting to, but then I saw on Instagram and caught up later that maybe somebody had made an appearance on the Alex Jones show that had something to do with one of the, well, more discussed characters in the JFK case. Okay, and not necessarily the first name that you would think of on this show for sure, but definitely somebody tied to, well, let's spoil it a little bit, the universe of LBJ. Anyway, before I go any further into the discussion, let's see how Larry Hancock is, because he's with me tonight, and we're going to actually team up sort of to do an interview with a really unique guy that I'm real happy to have on the show, who is related to one of those people who was in that Johnson universe. And is he the guy who was working with him in the Oval Office? No. Anyway, maybe it goes a little deeper. Maybe it doesn't. You got to see for yourself. Larry, how you doing tonight, sir?
I'm doing good, Chuck. And as I was just saying, this show has taken me back like almost 30 years to the late 90s when I was working all things Texas. And it's like, it's been a great opportunity for me to try to recover some long buried memories.
Right. And, you know, I'm struggling in my head to figure out the proper way to introduce the man that's with us today, because he's an interesting guy. And like just talking to him a little bit off air, it has been interesting for me. I'm very curious about this audio that came out. I mean, perhaps you and I should talk about that real fast, because I wasn't even aware of that audio, and you passed it over to me, and I said, whoa, how did I miss this? And I did. I was busy with other things, and I was like, whoa, wait a minute, how did I miss this? It was literally marked as a confession, once again, regarding the JFK assassination, and maybe you could help me set this up just a little bit, because I think it requires some setup before we let this gentleman speak for himself about this tape. It's wild, though. Go ahead, Larry.
This was an area that got a lot of discussion, as I say, starting in the late 90s. Probably what really brought it to more general attention is Billie Sol Estes did an interview with a French journalist, William Ramond, and that interview was circulated. I got a copy of it, an English translation of the interview, and in it, Billie Sol Estes was talking about the involvement of Lyndon Johnson and Cliff Carter in a series of murders out in West Texas, and that really surfaced this within the assassination research community. It became a big deal for 2 or 3 years. A lot of discussion. Of course, Johnson had been discussed as a suspect since day one.
Yes.
You know, when I told Shane when I first started working in Texas, it's like everybody I talked to, all the Texans said they assumed it was Johnson because nobody trusted him about anything, and it was just kind of like the assumption he must have had something to do with it. But that's almost 3 decades. You know, that's a long time ago. But it was a topic of great discussion for 2 or 3 years, and then Billie Sol Estes published his own book, I think after maybe Ramond did not give him the kind of money that he was expecting, as I recall from one conversation, and that carried it forward. But it's not been, it was as these things do, they come and go. So it was a very hot topic at one point in time. You would have found it all over the CompuServe JFK forum, but it really has not been around for a couple of decades as a major discussion topic, to my knowledge.
Right. Now, for a long time, it was preserved in the man who killed Kennedy kind of concept. And in fact, the Men Who Killed Kennedy, they took away that episode, right, from the Men Who Killed Kennedy series. Although I got to say, the way that they scripted that was pretty interesting, because I was just thinking of it while you were speaking. Tongues were already wagging in Texas, regarding Johnson immediately, because Johnson's from Texas. It would have made sense. Kennedy's killed in Texas. But then it got deeper, and at some point we have this testimony, too, right, where you have this list of victims of Lyndon Baines Johnson, and that surfaced, and that was obviously clearly shown in that episode of The Men Who Killed Kennedy. And as far as I know, that is the main place that people were still discovering this, is by the bootleg copies of episode 9 of The Men Who Killed Kennedy. You know what I mean?
That is true, but Chuck, the kind of surprising thing is that had first become public back in 1984. Again, this is not a new story. Billie Sol had appealed some charges he'd been convicted of, and he was looking for a deal with the grand jury. Douglas Caddy of Watergate fame was his lawyer at that point in time, and his paperwork actually refers to a series of murders in West Texas and the murder of JFK, and at that point in time, he was talking to his lawyer about the fact that he had tapes with Cliff Carter talking about this. So again, this is really a long time story that surfaces again and again over time.
Right. So now enter Mr. Stevens into this conversation. Which how you doing tonight, sir? You ready to tell this story?
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me on, and I'm excited to talk with you guys and your audience.
Right. Now, Larry has just given, I think, a really excellent background on this as to what people could have discovered, where they might have heard the name Billie Sol Estes before, and where they might recognize that he was tied to this circumstance, that he was known among people who researched the assassination and things like that. And indeed, going all the way back to the 80s. This was one of the things that I had to be initiated into, because I got into the case in about 88 myself. And, of course, I had to hear about this, but it was one of those things I didn't know what to do with. It was part of what everybody called the Texas Connection, and one guy wrote a book which wasn't all that great called The Texas Connection. But other people had written many a book about these different connections in Texas, and this involved the oil men and Madeline Brown and everything. Over the years, going through the Geraldo appearances, going through the television appearances, and all of that. And meanwhile, this is a member of your family we're talking about here over and over again. So let's begin there.
Yeah, and it's fascinating hearing Larry talk about some of the conversations he had with my granddad. He hadn't been with us for over a decade now, and, he certainly missed. But I remember vividly the times of Saul talking about, we're going to get a big book deal. It's going to be a movie deal. And, he went from being one of the wealthiest men in Texas way before I was born in the 50s and early 60s to really, it was a riches to rags story of my grandmother after they took everything from him and put him in prison. Her working 3 jobs and sewing my mom and her brothers and sisters' clothes. They had it really, really rough. And, it was kind of tough on the family. But a lot of them recovered to some degree. And Saul always thought in his head, he still had a kind of a twinkle in his eye. And he thought that he was going to recover financially and make a big mint and get it all back. And part of that was, about a book deal or a movie deal. And, frankly, I kind of never I started to give up on that because there were probably 2 or 3 different ones. And finally, I was like, I don't think anybody's ever going to pay the money to do this deal and make it happen. But guess who knows, Larry, maybe your name was one that he had mentioned at the time, or, somehow perhaps we were in the same conversation area. So it took a few decades to get together, but here we are.
Well, yeah, and that's an interesting take because, look, on the one hand, there is your life experiences and what goes on. And then later on in life, a lot of people try and cash in on something that they were part of something or other. And I'm not casting any aspersions here. I wouldn't blame him, especially, he has to go through his family having to go through what it goes through, when you get incarcerated and you lose things that way and you lose your standing in society, your property itself, all of that. I mean, look, everybody looks to come back out of that and say there's got to be some redemption here. And if you have something that you could offer, I mean, why not? Plus, I mean, if you're talking about the 1980s on, there's a lot of lucrative deals here that are made. I mean, for God's sake, they paid Vince Bugliosi $1 million, and he didn't know anything about the case at all to write a book. Why not? And yeah, I'm taking a stab at a dead guy, but I would do it if he was alive. Trust me. Point is, right? There was plenty of money. Why not? He has a connection, and controversial connection, but a guy who is forever marked as what? One of the, I mean, let's be blunt. You've heard this before. He's marked as one of the con men who was part of, right, Johnson's criminal organization. And by the way, I have no problem calling Lyndon Baines Johnson a criminal, but I'll leave that alone. Maybe you'd agree with me, maybe not. We'll see. But look, your grandpa's your grandpa, and he has this tie to it. And I mean, what were your thoughts about it early on? I mean, did you know about these tapes all along? Did you know about the whole story all along, or did you only know about part of it as you were growing up and learn about it later? I mean, give us an idea of your awareness of this.
All right. Yeah. So one of my earliest childhood memories, and I guess this would have been in the early 80s, was going in this old beat up limo and driving out to Big Springs, Texas, and picking Saul up from jail or prison out there in Big Springs. And I was just excited that we were going to get to, have my granddad back and have him as part of my life, and certainly not old enough to understand or comprehend any of the magnitude of picking your granddad up for prison or what that really meant. I mean, it did feel kind of dirty, and I knew that I didn't necessarily want to probably touch a lot of people there or something, which, isn't necessarily true, but that's the memory that I have of when I was 6, maybe 7 years old, of going into a prison to pick him up. And then all of a sudden I was on the front page of the Abilene Reporter News with him holding me and carrying me out of jail. I was excited about it. I thought it was pretty cool that I was on the newspaper. But then, friends at school, and all of a sudden it blew up that, my granddad was a con man and a bad guy and a felon and all this stuff. And so, Abilene was a pretty small town then, and still to some degree is, and you get judged pretty hard for that stuff. So all of a sudden when Saul starts living with us, it was kind of almost a burden at times.
Right.
He lived with me and my mom and my dad for years, and then my mom afterwards. And frankly, I really avoided most of this stuff. I'd never read his book, either of his books, my aunt's book. I haven't read most of the books on him. I read Roger Stone's book, but I just stayed away from it because it just was kind of almost a negative thing.
I got you. So you're 6 or 7 when he comes out of prison.
Yeah.
Okay. And then how long does it take before, like I say, you become more aware of this stuff? I mean, you said initially you weren't really, it's just your granddad's coming out and you got the childish view of prison, which is normal, natural. You don't know what to make of it. I mean, listen, grown people don't know what to make of prison if they have no exposure to it. But the thing is, okay, you got granddad back home and you start to realize the community's not necessarily welcoming him back with open arms, and you got to contend with, was he a bad guy? He's in prison, but he's my granddad, and you're dealing with him on a daily basis, and you're saying to yourself probably like he doesn't seem like a bad guy, right? I mean, this kind of thing going on. But eventually you're going to change and you're going to start to look into these things. And just to qualify it, how old are you today as we speak, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 48 now.
48 now. So you're just a little bit younger than me. Okay. It's interesting, though, because this is a big transition to go from 6, 7-year-old to, just edging up to 50. All right. A lot of things go on. So tell me about how you learned and grew into this, to know about this a bit.
And I don't remember specifics, like a specific time of, this was the time that we sat down and had the talk, that there's these tapes and whatnot. But I do remember at a certain age, me, my brother, cousins of us talking about, Saul, the only reason he's still alive is he supposedly has these tapes. And he knows who killed John F. Kennedy. And, his life's endangered. And the reason he does certain things is so that he's trying to protect us from being in danger. And so it's kind of like you kind of live in a little bit of fear of something bad could happen based on this knowledge that, there's powers that be out there that if these tapes were to get out, that something could happen, or that if he didn't have them, that he'd be dead. So as a kid, it's kind of formative, it sticks in your head a little bit, and you kind of keep your head on a swivel, just looking around to make sure everything's safe. And then, as I've gotten older, I've started to look at him different. I think I hurt his feelings a lot of times because I was partial to my granddad on the dad side of the family. Because frankly, I bought into what was said about him to some degree, and there are some truths in everything that's said, but the more, especially in the last few years, as I've looked into it more, and especially in the last few weeks, as I've talked to all these people that knew him, I've started to understand that kind of the character assassination attempts on people and the media and what they can do to people, they did a lot of that to him. I mean, he brought a little bit of it on himself, but there was a lot that Lyndon nor the Kennedys wanted him out talking or funding LBJ or involved. And the attack on him was really an attack on LBJ. And there was no way to really get him off without incriminating LBJ. So LBJ just kind of left him to rot. So I look at it differently now, a much different lens today than I did even 2 months ago.
Right. And I mean, there's a lot to be said there because, again, it's interesting. I mean, we even know that the Johnson estate through Lady Bird was still, utilizing influence over the media and things like that. I mean, decades later, Johnson's dead in 71, I think. But for decades, the influence would still be there. There was pressures on people not to discuss things, media companies, people that weren't connected. So I can imagine somebody who was in that universe would be pressured as well. But these tapes, and this is the important thing, right? Because these tapes are crazy in that, I mean, there's a portion here where you have a guy like, I don't know, maybe Larry, you should explain Cliff Carter for a moment. And we should talk about who's on this tape here, because we're hearing about your granddad. He's one of the voices on the tape. But there's another.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Chuck, because one thing I would recommend, and I'd recommend this to anybody who really wanted to understand the background of this story.
Right.
This story is really about Billie Sol Estes and Texas politics and the Democratic National Committee, which Johnson set up from the beginning. There was no real Democratic National Committee until Johnson or Republican. Johnson came up with this concept of collecting money and parceling it out nationwide to different Democratic campaigns, but obviously to the Democrats he wanted to give it to. And so he created this whole concept of going out and getting big donors, kind of bringing them inside the administration, giving them special access, getting their money, but not necessarily even to LBJ, which is kind of different for LBJ, but to the DNC as a slush fund, as a PAC. If a lot of what we're seeing right now came out of this era in time at around 1960, 58 to 60. And if Billie Sol Estes played a major role in coming up with money to go to the DNC, and that was all administered by the head of the DNC, who was Cliff Carter.
Wow.
Cliff Carter wasn't really as part of the Johnson administration per se. He was Johnson's political network, political bagman, if you want to call him that. I would recommend to anybody a book called Act of Treason by Mark North. Mm-hmm. And Mark actually digs into a huge amount of detail in, people, I think, maybe think that Billie Sol Estes did have a lot of money, and he did have private aircraft, and he did loan it to the DNC, and he did send money to Washington, D.C. Mark even found copies of, hundreds of thousands of dollars sent to the DNC, and Estes did have contacts into the Agriculture Department with Secretary Freeman. So Estes was very much embedded in both the DNC and the Ag Department, which is the source of a lot of the scandals that get talked about, and they were there. But Cliff Carter, you need to kind of compartmentalize in your mind, is he's a Johnson political aide. He's not so much administration per se, as he's an organizer for Johnson. Collect money, disperse money. So that's who he really is. And when these scandals started to emerge circa 1961 out in Pecos, it was tremendously embarrassing for Johnson because there are documented connections. There are letters, and yes, he brought Estes to the inauguration for he and Kennedy. And so there's no doubt about these connections and of Estes taking advantage of them. He has access to Freeman's office, and it's embarrassing for JFK. I will say, not nearly as embarrassing as the Bobby Baker scandal, which would come up in '63 with Johnson, but in its day, it was, national news. It wasn't just Texas. It was national news. The local newspaper reporter who broke the scandal got a Pulitzer for covering the Estes scandal out in West Texas. So I got to say one thing you have to consider. In 1962, 61, 62 into 63, Estes was a well-known national name, probably more so than Cliff Carter, because Carter is kind of behind the scenes. But Estes was very prominent nationwide.
Right. So these two men that are clearly involved in shaping what it is we're dealing with today when it comes to the national committees and, how they created these funds to be able to push them around to do things like influence elections in other states and stuff like that. The stuff that we see above board today, this was just coming into existence at this time. And why are we talking about Cliff Carter? Well, he's the other guy on the phone for this conversation. And I don't know, if I was Billie Sol Estes, I might have been taping everything, to be honest with you. But but it seems as though he was, because I wouldn't have trusted the circumstance I was in. Again, I'm thinking defensively here.
Billie Sol, in 1984, Billie Sol, when he was making his grand jury appeal, told his lawyer, Douglas Caddy, that he had taped everything. He never trusted any of these people, so he was making tapes all the time.
Right. And anyway, so back to you now, Mr. Stevens. I got to say, this is interesting because tell people, if they haven't heard the tape, and I'm going to give you guys a link to go and listen to it for yourselves. There's only one place I've seen it now available on the internet, just a little snippet. But, kind of describe, if you wouldn't mind, what's on the tape.
Excellent. I will. And if it's okay, I just want to kind of rewind back on a couple of things to catch up as I've just been making notes.
Absolutely. Please do.
So for the record, LBJ, he died in 1973.
73. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah. And that's important because this tape, I believe it was recorded in 1971. So it was, a couple of years perhaps before LBJ had passed away.
That's why I'm mixing up 71. Okay, my mistake there. I'm thinking 71, but it's 73 that Johnson died in. My mistake. Thank you.
Yes, sir. And Larry, you're the real deal. The amount of history and factual information that you have is it possibly surmounts most of the other folks that have reached out to me since this. And in fact, I did not know that basically Johnson and Carter created the DNC. I've had several people posting and saying and texting, "Oh my gosh, this kills the DNC." That makes more sense now after what you just taught me about that. But one thing we're discussing also was how all these stories get shut down. And in the 70s, at the time of LBJ's death, he was worth about $25 million. Mm-hmm. And to put that into terms today, that correlates into probably $250 million, $270 million. So that's huge. I mean, we look at Barack Obama coming out of office, and he's worth $25 million in today's dollars. Well, this would be like him coming out and being worth $250, $260 million. My granddad had said that he personally gave him approximately $10 million over the years, and whether that went in directly to his bank account or into, funding different folks. Either way, there's a big legacy and then a big pile of money and wealth that was left behind. And so Jack Valente was appointed over the Motion Picture Association, mm-hmm. and his job until he died or left that was to protect any motion picture coming out to ensure that nothing would come out against LBJ and could harm that reputation and that legacy. And then there's also another guy, I think his last name was Johnson, that was put in with CNN that was over all of the media to help protect and cover that up. Mm. So there were a bunch of different angles put forth to try and suppress the truth, just like we've seen in, the last decade. But, there was a lot going on to suppress that. And you're right, there are a bundle of tapes out there. This one is, one of the most damning. There's others that I've heard of and folks that supposedly have them, but, nobody's willing to let go of those or share those at this point. So I trust they'll come out in time. Mm. But to get to your question, Chuck, about what's on the tape, if you'd like, I can play it. I can play part of it, or I can just fill you guys in on what's on there, however you'd like to approach that.
Yeah, sure. If you're able to play it like nice and loud, and we'll hopefully see if people can hear it. If not, I can go to the link and play it on the show here. Either way, because I don't have a digital copy myself. But go right ahead if you want to try and play it. I'll mute up, and I'm sure Larry will mute up, and we'll just listen if you want to play it. You have it ready?
I do. And for the viewers, as Larry mentioned, it's super important to research and start looking into the names of this, of Cliff Carter and who he is. You can go on to Oval Office tapes and Spartacus Educational, listen to Cliff Carter's voice. I know my granddad's voice for sure, but when I first had these tapes transcribed, I looked up Cliff's voice just to make sure that it was real. And you can tell it's the same guy talking. But anyways, I'll hit play on it and just tell me if y'all can hear it loud enough if it's coming through.
Sure.
It's sure good to see you. How's life treating you today?
Well, Sal, it's been a pretty touch and go situation. Lyndon and I have had quite a few unpleasant words here lately over the deal that he hired Mac Wallace to assassinate the president. It's been hectic in every way, but we've lived through it this far, and I guess we'll continue to do so. Lyndon should have never issued that order to Mike, but we've had our differences, and I'm a true blue to Lyndon, as I've always been, and tried to carry out every order that he's ever given me. But this is one I'll probably never be able to forget. And the times that we've had in Texas, and the embarrassment that Lyndon had gotten from Kennedy, I guess there wasn't anything else to do but what he did.
Well, Lyndon could have really hit me if he would.
Well, Lyndon's the kind of person that doesn't want to help anyone. He's all for Lyndon, and that's the way he's pretty much
kind of blackmailed me to keep my mouth shut. And if I hadn't had a bunch of tapes that I'd played after I got killed, because, 17 got killed in this situation very mysteriously. And I've found a lot of time, and I've lost a lot of money, and hurt my family a whole lot. And it's really got me disgusted with Lyndon in one way. In one way, I feel real sorry for him. But I really feel like that in Lyndon's heart, he felt like that he was doing the right thing. He felt like that he was the savior of the common man. I feel like that in his heart he wanted to help people that had not. But I don't believe that anything, my church background would have never let me sanction all the killings that he has done. What do you think about it, Cliff? Do you really believe that it could have been handled anyway without killing all these people and got rid of the Kennedys? You think he won the election against him?
Well, I don't really believe so. He tried desperately to do just that, and there didn't seem to be any other way. I know that he regrets a lot of things that he has done, but still, it's been a battle from day one.
Well, Daryl, I sure do appreciate all the things that you've done for us, and I appreciate the trust that I have in you at any time for a long time friend. And I'm just sorry that I've embarrassed all my friends, but all my friends through this. Oh, you didn't embarrass me. And what I was really afraid of, my brother Bob that got killed, our plane was down at Bryan the day that Mac Wallace killed Henry Marshall. And I was afraid it's going to tie him into the thing, and we couldn't afford to. In fact, Pam started to write a book. And when she really got scared when she got into the thing, it was just too scary a deal. But anyhow, this too will pass. Well, it's been a long old journey. What do you think about Ethel Bankston?
Well, that he was a great leader, and he's been probably one of the best things that ever happened in Dallas, Texas. Of course, he's got a lot of real good friends, and Lyndon's been one of his true buddies for many, many years. And anything that he just has to have, WO will see that it's done.
Well, I just can't believe that Ethel Bankston has the power over the police department that he has. He buys every year, the sheriff buys him a brand new car, Bill Decker, and I just don't see how politically that he can get with it. But nobody will ever understand, and really in the early years, I thought that Lyndon really had a mission from a higher power, whom I choose to call God, to carry out a lot of things for the common people. And I really believe in his heart that he thought that he was destined to rule the people. How do you size up Lyndon Cliff after all these years of horror?
Well, actually, Lyndon's just been kind of going downhill health-wise and politically wise. He's just wore out. And I feel like he's come to his end of his rope. But all these things that's been eating on him for all these years have just now taken its course. And I feel like Lyndon's done a lot of good things in his life, and he's done a lot of bad things.
But Cliff, I hate to see you so downtrodden and so discouraged. And I just hope that you can get a hold of yourself and not be so tore up. But anyhow,
Now, that is an incredible conversation, which, again, I don't know if anybody's ever heard that much of it publicly even. But, man, you know, you've got the Henry Marshall death referenced here, which, again, if you watch that Men Who Killed Kennedy episode, you know about that, even, you know, in a cursory sense. But also he mentions his Saul's brother, right? He mentions he was killed. Now, I don't know. He didn't implicate anybody directly there, but if it's in this conversation, that's another thing to consider. And Mr. Stevens, you know anything about that, or is there something to that which I just heard?
You know, it's funny. There are so many little trails that you could run off on researching this. Like I've tried to look up F.O. Bankston, and then, you know, I guess Bill Decker to see. I'm assuming that those were actual people and the head of police in Dallas. And
well, Bill Decker was the sheriff of the county there. He was the county sheriff at the time Kennedy was assassinated, by the by. And, all
right. So basically that's like him, I think, telling on him that he was involved in it.
He's in the motorcade. For God's sake.
Oh, my Lord. So
yeah,
it is a lot. I think all these words, little sentences and different things probably have more meaning than I know. But guys like you can, just like you said, like I can kind of break this deal apart. But with I think it's Uncle Bob, I believe he died, may have been in a plane crash. I've been told before. I'm sorry, my memory's not that good, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to my family members that have passed away, but I don't recall specifically. Now, I also don't believe that it was anything suspicious as far as their thinking.
Oh, that's okay. It's just that since he mentioned it in the midst of this conversation, I'm thinking to myself, maybe it's got something to do with it. And that's the other thing, is Cliff Carter doesn't balk during these discussions. Says himself, Mac Wallace was sent to kill Kennedy. I mean, in this conversation, and, you know, Cliff Carter doesn't go, hey, wait a minute, you know, that's not right. No, he says it himself. And, Larry, I mean, like, try and give us a little context here for a lot of what you just heard, if you don't mind. And then I want to go back to Mr. Stevens on it and get what he knows personally again. But I did want to ask directly about your uncle there. Look, I don't necessarily know how my uncles died either. But, you know, it's one of those things. But I just heard it on there, and I said to myself, is this involved in it too? Who knows, quite honestly? Or did he have a suspicion, even if it was a plane crash, right? Could he have felt like maybe that was a warning shot at him? Or who knows? You know, I don't necessarily know without being able to speak to your granddad myself, right? And hearing this tape. So I wouldn't know what was in his mind when he brought that up. But Larry, do you have any thoughts on what you just heard, or have you heard all of this before, etc.?
Well, I've heard the fundamentals before, and actually, again, this goes back to Billie Sol's interview with William Ramon for the book that was published only in France, by the way. And in that, I've got notes from the interview, and he was very straightforward in terms of, you know, the murders, and he provides some more detail in that. You've always got to segment what Carter would have known, what he would have told Estes about any of the murders. But I think one thing we can confirm, Billie Sol did say in the interview that he had talked with Carter about the Marshall-related murders at the time. And Henry Marshall was actually murdered in 1961, before this whole scandal came out. You know, this is earlier. Timeline is important. Estes and the scandal were not really in the press at that point in time. Investigations were being started within the Department of Agriculture because things had been pointed out, and leases and properties, and there was an investigation going on at the time. Marshall, who had signed off on a lot of things that actually turned out not to have been there, was killed. So if you compartmentalize these murders and the murders and suicides involve people that were in agriculture and in the businesses that Billie Sol were in, and even the insurance side of insuring those assets. There were not just Marshall, but there were other murders at that point in time, and that's pretty well documented because basically when Estes was paroled his last time and came out of prison, he decided to seek basically an overturn of some of the charges against him, even compensation for some things. And he involved not only Douglas Caddy, but he got a lot of support from Clint Peoples, who was a Texas Ranger that had been involved in investigating especially the Marshall murder. And Peoples made a very good case for the murder. And based on Peoples' case, the death came back to a grand jury, and Billie Sol Estes was invited to testify and took that point in time to initiate this process with Caddy and to jumpstart the whole thing. So I guess in terms of context, we have a lot more detail. And this really all started with the murders out in West Texas, Marshall and the other ag and Estes related business people. So that part almost stands on its own, especially with the investigation that Peoples did, which is well documented. The JFK thing was kind of an add-on at the last. And by the way, just for context, and the connection between Johnson and Mac Wallace is well documented. Mac Wallace had worked in the ag department. Johnson kind of had the ag department in his control for a good period of time there.
Right.
And Mac Wallace had indeed killed a fellow who was competing for the affections of Johnson's sister. And there's no doubt about that.
That's
Johnson.
Douglas, you're talking about Douglas Kinzer, right?
Douglas Kinzer and Josepha Johnson. And Johnson did, again, a strong case that Johnson intervened and interfered with the witnesses and compromised witnesses, and Wallace got off. So there's a lot of dirtiness even before this begins. But I guess what I'm really trying to say, the connection between Johnson and Mac Wallace for that is well established.
Right.
The connection between Estes, Marshall, Mac Wallace, and the murders out in West Texas is well established. And that was all kind of sitting there, and that was kind of the basis for this appeal to the grand jury that Estes launched and offered those tapes that are being talked about here. He offered all of those tapes which would have discussed that dirty business in West Texas as part of the deal, and actually got as far as the DOJ became involved, the DOJ got in contact with him, and even had a meeting with him in which he was supposed to turn over tapes and other documents, but they would not guarantee immunity. And because they would not guarantee immunity, they met like in a motel conference room. They met. It's kind of like, and at the last minute, it's kind of like, unless I have written offer of immunity or guarantee of immunity, I'm not handing this off. And the whole thing collapsed at that point in time. Right. So that's just a little background to separate it. There's a lot going on with this beyond JFK and Carter and Johnson and what may have been going on there.
Right. So, Mr. Stevens, were you aware of this at the time at all, or did you become aware of this later regarding the whole circumstance that Larry just laid out?
Yeah, I mean, I've learned more and more about it over the years, and plot twist to some degree add to it. So Mac Wallace, or Malcolm Wallace, his family has reached out to me, and they were a little bit shocked, but their family stories and family secrets align with our family stories and family secrets. So at some point, they're not comfortable. They're like, Shane, if you're still alive in a month and a half or so, we'll probably go on and talk about it. But they had the same fears, just like you talked about Henry Marshall. For the audience, I think it's important for them to know that he was found dead on his farm in Robinson County.
Right.
And he had 5 bullet wounds across his chest. He had a contusion to his head. They later exhumed him from his grave and did a test, and they found 16% poisoning from carbon monoxide in him. But that was ruled a suicide. Right. And even J. Edgar Hoover, who was as corrupt as the day is long and was, huge part of LBJ and his control and influence, he said, I cannot see how a man could shoot himself 5 times with the .22 long rifle.
Yeah.
It's pretty hard to do, but the judicial system, the courts, the coroner, everybody had reason, I suppose, to rule that a suicide. And so when Saul got out, one of the things out of prison in the 80s, one of the things he wanted to do was right the ship there. And the spouse of Mr. Marshall, she was finally able to get insurance payout, because they wouldn't pay out life insurance to her, any insurance, because it was ruled a suicide.
Right.
But based on the testimony that my granddad gave, and really common sense, we know that it wasn't a suicide. It was overturned. But yeah, so everything Larry just said, again, factual history, anybody can look it up. There's nothing conspiratorial or questionable about anything that Larry said. It's all just plain, simple facts.
Oh, no, I do my very best to not come on here with a lot of, like, if I say something that's speculative, believe me, I'd say this is all speculation. When Larry speaks, you don't hear me qualifying what he's saying, do you?
No, he knows his business.
Yeah, no.
I wish I could offer it a little bit more. I almost had a chance to. When the Marshall death was being investigated by the FBI, a family friend of ours named Jelly Bryce actually went down to long time, very famous FBI officer and crack pistol shot, went down to Pecos to investigate. And he said, actually asked my brother if he wanted to come along because he thought it was really strange and he was really going to look into it. My brother told me, I really, really missed going on that trip. I should have gone down there and hear what he had to say about it. But when he came back, he was just shaking his head, kind of like, no, that doesn't stick.
Doesn't work. Anyway, but getting back to the direct connection here, a lot of things get opened up, because of this audio, if you think about it. And again, look, it's not even a definitive, this is Cliff Carter saying this is, your granddad saying this, and, what knowledge did they have or what knowledge were they given to is yet another story. And you got to very carefully examine that, especially considering we don't have these people to talk to anymore, right? We can't cross-examine this. Exactly. All we can do now is look back and try and put the pieces together. And these are some incredible pieces. And meanwhile, you're telling me there's bundles of audio out there, and one might ask, why now? Let's say, why now would be the best time, or do you think it was a good time to finally surface this? Because obviously it's existed since 1971, this tape. And why is now a good time? I mean, Granddad's been gone, like you said, more than a decade, right? So,
right.
Why now exactly?
Well, the timing of it is fascinating, and I'll fill you in on the detail. But really, even just today, if you guys think about it, you're in the middle and amidst a big part of American history, right smack dab in the middle of it. Because if that tape is true, and if we find out from the release of the JFK files what I'm assuming may be in there, then it says so much about what our country's come from and the deceit that we've endured as an American public. But just today, there's a lady, Anna Paulina, that's heading up the task force, and she says, based on what she's seen, there were 2 shooters. And then based on this tape, and based on what I've heard, Little Family Secrets, it sounds like there was always more than one shooter. And again, common sense leads us to that to some degree as well. Right. But as far as the timing, it was kind of put on me to take the real tapes, the original tapes from the family. And I'm the oldest grandson, so I suppose it makes sense. Mm-hmm. But then once I converted it over to digital, which that's kind of a funny story in itself, I've distributed multiple copies of that out to everybody to hold on to. Right. And that was just kind of same concept as my granddad. If, something happens to these tapes or to me, well, at least there's a copy of it that survives that can be released in time to share the truth.
Right.
And it's probably, to some folks, especially outside of this LBJ system, like they probably think it's crazy to be afraid or concerned about your life being in danger 60 years after something happened.
Right.
But I can tell you that fear has been real within the family, and nobody really wanted to go about releasing it or taking that risk. And frankly, the only times that I pulled this tape out, the digital recording to let people hear it, were, a few friends or folks that were fighting for the right reasons. So, at one point I went to a round table with President Trump, and the scheduler supposedly had let him listen to it. I let Don Jr. listen to it. I've let Ken Paxton listen to it. Several key people that are fighting, the good fight, and frankly, the fight that I think JFK was fighting. And ultimately, I wanted to warn them that they could be in the crosshairs. And as it turns out, obviously, we've seen what happened, because ultimately, if they can't get people to back down, slow down, stop attacking what a lot of power and wealth has been built off of, they'll do whatever it takes to get rid of them.
Yeah, well, you see, now you and I could disagree on a lot of steps along the way to that statement, but that's the truth of it, is that, if the powers that be don't want you to speak or don't want certain facts to be known, there is no end to the amount of damage they're willing to do or the amount of death they're willing to cause in their own cause. That's something I think you and I would absolutely agree on, regardless of politics, regardless of, this is just the way of the world. If you need to be shut down by those who have money and power, you will be. It's just that simple.
That should scare every American, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, centrist. If our government and powers that be are more powerful than our president and can hide and run covert operations that none of us and even the president don't know about, that's a problem. That's not a real functioning democracy.
Right. Absolutely true. So let's go a little further here. What else in this? Outside of the grand statement you just made, and I'm glad you did, because you're basically saying, look, this needs to be done. You're taking it upon yourself. You realize that there's some risk to doing this. And I'm really grateful that you're sharing even this part of it with me, and with those listening, and Larry. This is a really a great privilege to be able to hear these things and to get a look at a real intimate look, quite honestly, at something that has been just sort of discussed, just sort of floated out there in the past. And I'm really, really grateful. I want to thank you for doing that, first of all, before I forget. But, but what is it that, the rest of the story that needs to be told? What do you think it is here?
Well, I think if you look at, say, the overall case, the overall wealth, it's concerning that we've got, monuments and highways and you name it, named after an individual who theoretically, based on this tape and based on some other evidence, had a president of the United States killed, right. Essentially a coup of taking over from them. Mm-hmm. So grasping that and then essentially looking at the ripple effects, because if that's the case, it wasn't just LBJ involved. That means Hoover was involved. That means you've got CIA involvement. That means you've got FBI involvement. That means you have the sheriff up in Dallas and their police department involved. And then what happened with those people? Well, all these names that have been alleged to be involved, many of them, Dulles, you name it, they've risen to massive levels of wealth and power. Right. And there's some folks that say that we've elected very few presidents, truly elected them since the 60s. That, for the most part, they've controlled the elections and We've just kind of been puppets to whoever they choose to put in power, and they've made massive amounts of wealth and money off of the taxpayers' backs.
Right.
So if that's been going on for 60 years, the implications are huge. But we also have the chance right now to clean it up and fix that and talk about an amazing era going forward of what this country could look like and the level of prosperity that the American people could achieve.
Well, fair enough. Is there anything else that we need to sort of wrap around on this, Larry? You think anything else that we should mention here in fairness and to make sure the context is all there? I absolutely leave it to you, because I think this is, again, it's a remarkable piece of tape, and there's more. But nonetheless, I mean, what do you think, Larry?
Well, again, for some context, because we already like context, going all the way back to this period of time, 1999, 1988, when I first learned of this, actually, there is a lot that could be done in terms of investigating Johnson. As you know, Chuck, in my book, Someone Would Have Talked, 2010, I lay out 3 chapters that present Johnson as an accessory. I'll be perfectly honest, I still have a lot of tactical and logistics problems seeing him as the only person involved in this. Like, he and Cliff Carter and Mac Wallace did this at their own initiative by themselves. But in the book, I lay out the case against both Cliff Carter and Lyndon Johnson, why they would have participated, why they would have been involved, how Johnson would have been connected to the rest of the conspiracy, even the timeline. And I think that's important. So I guess what I'm really saying is, if we can get some more documents, there are things that we already know that are suggestive about Cliff Carter's involvement, not with Mac Wallace. I mean, and by the way, supposedly in the scenario from Billie Sol, Mac Wallace was shooting from the grassy knoll. He was not shooting from the book depository. We should probably get this on record. The scenario that I had in my notes and that he told Ramond was that Mac Wallace was shooting from the grassy knoll. Mac Wallace or Cliff Carter had hired Jack Ruby, who had hired Lee Harvey Oswald as kind of a gun for hire, and he was shooting from the Texas School Book Depository. So there were 2 shooters, right. But that's the scenario that's presented that way. But aside from that, there are a lot of things that Cliff Carter did in regard to the trip to Dallas, his communications with Jack Peterboe. Jack Peterboe was the Ag Department aide from the White House to actually run the motorcade, and did a lot of details. People heard from Peterboe, and they thought it was the Secret Service. And when the Secret Service was questioned, Lawson, the Secret Service chief of the motorcade, said, "No, that wasn't me. That was Peterboe. He put the cars in that sequence. He moved the motorcycles. We have people that say at the very last minute, the motorcycles were stripped off the rear of the president's car by somebody who came over from the vice president's vehicle." This has been explained in the past because of Johnson trying to minimize Kennedy's political impact in Texas. That's a long-standing argument. But I guess kind of to wrap up your question, there is a lot of room. We already know a lot that would have made Cliff Carter suspicious and Lyndon Johnson suspicious before the fact and after the fact. Right. So there's a lot of room to investigate their involvement. And I had thought from the very beginning, this even without hearing the tape, hearing it described to me and what I found out about Cliff Carter and the motorcade and the Texas trip, there was ample reason to be suspicious of he and Johnson. So with that as a starting point, it would be fascinating. I don't know if what concerns me about the documents is nobody really investigated Cliff Carter and Lyndon Johnson, even though during the Garrison investigation, there were claims that were made in Washington, D.C. by John Roselli, right, and remarks that he passed on up the channel. Johnson was scared, even in 1969, that people were coming forward and we're going to accuse him of the crime. And we've got all of that documented too. So there's a large story here for Johnson and for Cliff Carter. I don't know how much more we can get out of the documents, but it might be possible to get some more secondary testimony and an investigation of it. And I, for one, I agree with the point that Lyndon Johnson was intensely corrupt. And I would say it is very unsatisfying to have his name on so many things with how corrupt we know he now was. And it galls me to hear those guys talking on the tape about Lyndon Johnson, like, having good intentions and we'll follow him to the end regardless. It's kind of like, you guys listen to yourself talking and you know he killed people. What's going on with that tape? It's like, how can they even be talking that way about Lyndon Johnson? Oh, I'm tied to him to the end. I'm always going to be his man. It's like, what the heck?
Yeah, there's something really special there because, again, you know, this guy, whenever Johnson comes up in discourse now, right, the Civil Rights Bill, you know, he was a good guy, right? He's the and I'm like, how is it that these historians, I mean, there's I'm not even going to name the guy who's got like 3 volumes out there on Lyndon Baines Johnson, right, who mentions zero of his corruption, I'm pretty sure, throughout his books, because all he does is talk about, you know, this great president that came up at a time of tragedy and had to inherit all the mistakes of the Kennedys. And I'm going, man, you know, are you not looking at the whole of the man here? Are you not looking at the rest of the story? It kills me. You know.
And we even know, Chuck, this is historical record. Manchester did this. We even know Johnson spent the whole night after the assassination at home, at his house, talking to his political cronies about exactly how they were going to take over the Kennedy agenda.
Yeah.
It was none of it. We've got people being interviewed about how Johnson is literally going to lift that and make it his own.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And, you know, just I guess as a final thought here, unless you got something else that you think we missed, Mr. Stevens, I mean, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, that's really the thing that's incredible here is that still to this day, right, LBJ is this celebrated figure. And, you know, look, we should be honest about what it is we're looking at here, and we should get honest about who it is has been in charge, as you and I both agree. But, I mean, for God's sake, you know, something needs to be done here about balancing the record, at least. Don't you think? You know?
I do. And, you know, another thing I was just thinking of as far as, you know, a lot of folks, and I've watched the negative comments of, you know, Saul's a con man and this is AI generated and, you know, all these things. But, you know, perhaps we can pretend that is part of it. But if you're on that side of it, just try pretending that it's real and then start looking into all of it. Like, okay, well, if this is real, then the Warren Commission was a sham. All right, well, who's on the Warren Commission?
Right.
And then start looking into all those people. And I guarantee, I mean, it's a whole web that somebody with the, you know, right amount of time, resources, and access could dig into and, you know, figure out so much about our political past and the corruption and who was corrupt and who was on the take. And, you know, I think a lot of it was J. Edgar Hoover had tapes and information on so many people, and they'd set them up, but then they worked together, him and LBJ. And LBJ, even my granddad, he was most fascinated with LBJ. He had seen plenty of wealth. He'd seen plenty of power, but he had never seen anybody wield power like LBJ. And he was fascinated by it. He was enamored by it. And, you know, obviously it ended up negatively impacting him and his legacy. So I think there's a lot more to be unpacked with it. This is kind of the tip of the iceberg. And I hope you guys can run with it and take it because y'all are both highly educated on this topic and have the passion for it. So I'd love to follow up with y'all and see where it goes.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I know I'm going to follow up on this, and I'm going to encourage others to do the same, especially some friends I have in Texas. And I'm really glad that Larry got involved in this. And just for the record, somebody noted to me on Skype and I think they didn't hear me earlier when I said, because they heard Bill Decker mentioned on the tape. Bill Decker is actually, I said he was in the motorcade, but let me clarify that for you. He's in the lead car in the motorcade. He's in the pilot car of the motorcade, Mr. Stevens. Okay.
Wow.
That's who he's there with Jesse Curry. Jesse Curry's on the radio, if you've heard the radio transmissions, but in that car with him is Sheriff Bill Decker. And the majority of the first statements taken by witnesses that I used to have to go through when I was trying to determine, exactly what happened, what witness saw what, are referred to as Decker exhibits because they were taken by the sheriff's department. Okay, and they're literally, if you even attempt to enter them into evidence somewhere, they're referred to as Decker exhibits. I'm not sure if the warrant commission.
All the depositions were taken in the sheriff's department. Yeah. There
you go. I'm not making it. See, Larry's verifying what I'm saying. I'm not making it up. This is what I know I dug through. So.
Well. Yeah. Oh my God. And then, Larry, one thing that I did, like our little family side of it, was supposedly that Mac Wallace was in the repository, is what we've always heard. And there was a fingerprint of his. I've got a video that was recorded, and it was one of the former best fingerprint ID guys out there, and he says it's a match of that. And then the other thing that we've always thought or been told was that the shooter wasn't actually on the grassy knoll, that the shooter was behind a fence at the edge of the grassy knoll was the second shooter. And then there's a slight possibility I've heard, and I don't think it's from my granddad, but it's from one of his friends, that there was potentially a third one, but I don't have anything to really go off on that.
Well, a couple of things. That fingerprint has been since disputed quite well by a better fingerprint. And believe it or not, I tracked through to figure out who paid the guy that you're talking about that looked at that fingerprint. I went through all of that. It's actually a friend of mine that wrote that check. And
nice.
It's really interesting. But, he was mistaken, it seems like. But even so, that doesn't put Mac Wallace out of play. It just kind of puts him away from that fingerprint, in my mind. Now, and there's a pretty good book out there called Faustian Bargain, if you ever want to pick it up, that actually contains an appendix with that evidence in it. And it was something that an author named Joan Mellon did. She hired people to do it and compared it with Mac Wallace's military record fingerprints. So,
well, depending on how far I want to go with this deal and how many of these I want to do, I probably need to start researching and learning all that. So.
I'm just letting you know that there's a dispute on that. But again, I would place that shooter not on the knoll anyway. I would place that shooter somewhere near a fence, like you're saying, based on the work of forensics people who have guessed as to where the trajectory would have come from if people had done the right investigation in the first place. And here's where I have to mention somebody like Sherry Feaster. And I'm sorry, go ahead, Larry. You were going to say something?
I was just going to say, be prepared to devote a good time. I think I've probably got a 6-inch stack of papers dealing with that fingerprint in the TSBD and how it came to attention and the arguments for it and the arguments against it. And he only identified the fingerprint after somebody told him about a damage to the hand that would. But the point is, all I can say is what I was referring to are the notes from Ramon's interview with Billie Sol as to what he said then.
Right.
And then, that's way back in time. Absolutely, the debate about the fingerprint pros and cons is a deep one involving multiple print experts. And, good luck. That's kind of like, I hope you gain back the time I lost working on it.
For sure. Look,
but regardless of that, so one of the things we had discussed is, irrespective of that, I would say irrespective of even Mac Wallace prints or in the school book depository or whatever, there are things by themselves that connect Carter and Johnson even without that, and directly connect Carter. I'm talking about things relating to the motorcade, things relating to the plan, things relating to Johnson that night. Even if Mac Wallace was not part of the equation, there's a case to be made against Lyndon Johnson as a prime suspect, regardless of that. So wherever you get to on their fingerprints or whoever said, well, I think there would be a case there regardless.
And here's the other thing. Your granddad, and this is absolutely not meaning any sort of offense, but here's the thing. Your granddad is in no way claiming to have been there. So what he would have gotten would have been secondhand, but in his case, it's a hell of a secondhand. Because,
What he said, his deal was he was supposedly at the White House with Cliff Carter, Mac Wallace, and LBJ when LBJ said, we're going to move forward with this.
Right.
And so he wasn't there, wasn't a part of it, didn't help in the planning, and he took that to his grave that he was not a part of killing him. He actually liked Kennedy. He's got a thing that was, signed to him from Kennedy.
Right.
So it wasn't necessarily his doing, but he knew that he'd get killed regardless. But I think big picture, a lot of folks can get hung up on, was Mac in the repository? Was Mac there? Was Mac this? Was LBJ involved? But big picture, one thing that we can all agree on is that, our senses, like our God-given sense, tells us that we did not get the full truth, that there were a lot of things left out. We've been lied to. And I think that's the common thread that makes this whole mystery so fascinating to people is, what is the truth? Because we know damn good and well we didn't get the truth.
Exactly. No doubt about that.
Exactly. Right. So with that, I don't think you want to put out contacts or anything for people to get a hold of you, Mr. Stevens, right? Not directly anyway?
No, I do, just because the first time I did this was everybody started reaching out to my different businesses and tracking me down through different means and avenues. So I just set up a couple of things. So one of them is on Twitter, and it's just Shane Stevens TX. So ShaneStevens TX. And then I set up a little website, and it's just Stevens, Stevens, Team 6, and that's the number 6. So StevensTeam6.com. And please don't go because reach out to the businesses and everybody. It kind of freaks them out. So just if you need to contact me through that.
All right, so that's what we'll look at is the Shane Stevens TX on Twitter, right?
Yes, on X now.
X, right, Twitter X. I keep doing that, sorry. For years I was on Twitter, now I'm on X, excuse me. But, I'll actually go ahead and I haven't made contact with you there, but I'm going to do that right now. And certainly I bother him through that, exactly. And the other one is Stevens Team, you said?
Yeah, Stevens Team 6. So STEVENS TEAM and the number 6.com.
Excellent. All right. Well, we will leave it at that. And who knows, maybe I'll ask you to do a follow-up on this. I'm sure a lot of questions are going to come up when the podcast comes out and all that. Larry, is there anything else we need to say before we're all said and done here today?
No, I think that really covers it. I really appreciate that. It's a great discussion. And just let me know as soon as this is available online. So I want to do a blog on it myself. So that's great. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And I think we did it a little different than you might have heard it elsewhere, but that is what we do here. So remember this, guys. I am merely Ochelli, and all of you are indeed the effect. And I'll put the links in with the show notes so you can go ahead and follow Shane on Twitter. Obviously, I'll put Larry's links in there too, and you'll be able to follow up all you want. And at all times, I ask you, go ahead and do your own research, check into this, and at all times, think for yourself.
Ochelli.com radio network.
The views expressed by callers, co-hosts, or anyone else who happens to get on the air at Ochelli.com do not necessarily reflect the views of Ochelli.com or Chuck Ochelli, and we are not responsible for any stupidity which might ensue. Thank you.
In Denial, Secret Wars with Airstrikes and Tanks by Larry Hancock. Secret wars became a staple of U.S. covert operations and are still happening today. Larry Hancock's book, In Denial, rips the cover off many of them. Using new files, it exposes things about the Bay of Pigs that no one has ever written about before. It shows why it really failed and why the United States did not learn from it. It also shows why other countries today are doing secret operations with more success. This is the book that puts what some want to deny into the light. In Denial, Secret Wars with Airstrikes and Tanks. Larry Hancock. For more information, go to larry-hancock.com. Pick up your copy of In Denial at amazon.com in digital or physical form.
Yo, this is Doug Campbell, host of the Dallas Action Podcast presented by Wall Street Window. And you are listening to the Ochelli Effect. Revelation through conversation.
Go ahead, caller.
I'm interested in the truth about the JFK assassination.
Right. Well, what do you want to know?
Judy Baker's wild claim, Oswald girlfriend, she knew Ruby and Barry, cancer weapons. Really?
I imagine I could claim I have 4 wheels. It doesn't make me a wagon, but okay.
Oswald was on the kill team and trying to prevent the murder of John Kennedy. Come on now. Has a real expert on the JFK assassination looked into her claims?
Go to Amazon.com. Enter Judith Baker in her own words. You'll get results for a digital copy of a book where Walt Brown utilizes her own words and the known evidence in the case to get at, well, a different perspective, let's say. You can get Judith Barry Baker in her own words from the author himself, signed if you request it, by contacting Dr. Brown at KIASJFK@AOL.com. It's a fun book, and it actually dissects the many, many fantastic claims. Judith Barry Baker in her own words.
Thank you for all the great information.
The War State by Michael Swanson explains the great national transformation that took place and put the Kennedy presidency in the context of the times and reveals never-before published information about the Cuban Missile Crisis. President Kennedy would not have been assassinated if he had been president 200 years ago. His assassination took place in the context of the Cold War and the rise of the national security state. Before World War II, the United States was a continental republic. In the decade that followed, it became an imperial superpower. Generals such as Curtis LeMay not only wanted to invade Cuba, but knew that there were short-range missiles on the island armed with nuclear warheads that they could not destroy because they were on mobile launchers. Their invasion could have led to a third world war, and they wanted to go to war anyway. The War State by Michael Swanson reveals why and will show you what President Kennedy was up against. For more information, thewarstate.com.
Revelation through conversation.
Ochelli.com.
Get ready for the Ochelli effect.
Sonic entity known as Ochelli and the Greek. The Sonic entity known as Ochelli and the Greek.